Okay, thank you very much for the invitation and for giving me this opportunity to tell you a bit about the financing. And since this is a short presentation, I'm going to just go through the options, and I will be sending you my email if you want to ask for some specific information on specific funding. As you all know, this is the end of the period for the European Union, so there are new information that are going to be available in several months, and some new things will come to us, and we'll have to, we can communicate later on this, and we can share information on those. So let me just try to share my screen. Okay, not to share the wrong one with the photo of my children. So I hope you see everything. Okay, these are the fundings which I'm going to talk about. So this is EU multi-annual financial framework, which is the one that we are mostly talking about when we are mentioning financing for sustainable development and energy efficiency, renewables, climate change adaptation, and so on. But also about European emission trading scheme, so system for trading emissions from the producers of large quantity of greenhouse gas emissions. I'm going to tell you a bit more about that. I'm going to mention new financial framework for implementation of Green Deal. The issue is that due to this crisis with coronavirus, all the programming has been postponed on the level of the European Union. And now we have a situation when we already should have a national operational programs and start planning for the 2021-2027 period, but no countries have started this part yet. So this is just an introduction for the next period. I'm going to also mention funds which are funded from multi-annual financial framework, but not as grants, but as financial instruments, so loans, which have low interest rates and serve us for energy efficiency, renewable energy projects. Also, European investment banks, END, loans and guarantees for financing projects. A bit, just few sentences about EU support for creation of new financial instruments, because European Union has instruments which serve for creation of the other instruments. ESCO, as Roman has mentioned, I have worked for an ESCO, so energy service company, for 6 years. So this is also an interesting way of financing energy efficiency projects. Just few sentences about public-private partnership examples. And I think which is most interesting is microloans and crowdfunding cooperatives and energy communities, since these are the ones that include citizens, and then on local level include cooperation between citizens and local community, local administration, and the local small and medium enterprises, so something which is very interesting on local level. So, okay. As I've already mentioned, the EU budget is regulated by the MFF, a 7-year perspective. So this perspective we are dealing with now is 2014-2020. As I said, it's being finished this year, but since what's happening around us, we are kind of, some projects are a bit postponed, so a new perspective is not finalized yet. So almost 80% of the budget is inside 5 EU funds, which we probably all heard of. And these are European Structural Investment Fund, Regional Development Fund, Social Fund, Agricultural Fund for Rural Development, and Maritime and Fisheries Fund. The first two are most interesting to us because these are the ones that are financing energy efficiency and renewables. Mostly, for example, in our case, we also use European Social Fund for energy efficiency project because Social Fund funds energy poverty. And in some cases, when energy is a social problem also, which it is, yeah. You can also fund it through social fund. There are also some renewable energy projects funded through Agricultural Fund for Rural Development. and so on. But all in all, biggest investments in energy efficiency and renewables are the ones from the two first lines of funding. So for these funds, how they function, so countries and the EU define common strategic frameworks, so in cooperation. And then they have something called partnership agreement, where countries prove that they are going to implement and satisfy goals related to EU directives in energy efficiency, renewables, climate change, adaptation, and so on, via the funding they are given by the European Union. What they do next is create operational programs. So they countries define what are their priorities in development. Some countries or regions, because in some bigger countries this programming is divided by regions. Some countries and regions are very let's call it smart, and they are very focused, and they are choosing only the priorities which can be easily implemented. They are focused and can implement it in a period of time. Some countries, for example, Croatia has 9 priority axes, which is very hard to manage, and includes an operational programs which are very big, including a lot huge working groups, a lot of people, and so on. And this creates additional administration burden and problems. Then that's something called program management and project development. So so ESIF, European Structural Investment Fund, functions in a way that country has its program. After the program is developed, they do what we call calls for projects based on the program goals. And after all the projects are implemented, so the projects from the specific goal are implemented, then they ask final user. So there is a period in which country has to pre-finance these goals. And after that, European Union has a period of monitoring and of the implementation, and does a sort of revision of what's happening, so to decide sorry, about the repayment of the expenses. This is the example of Croatian operational program for competitiveness and cohesion, the biggest program for European Structural Investment Fund. And you can see there are 9 priority axes. As I said, it creates problems, a lot of reallocations between the axes and so on. And one of them is promotion of energy efficiency and renewable energy. I just mentioned that so I can tell you how it works in a specific example. So for promotion of energy efficiency and renewable energy, there are several priorities, and one of them is, for example, the reduction of energy consumption in residential buildings. This is in line with European Performance in Buildings Directive. So you have to, with your program, implement the goals of the European Union. And now we have legislative framework in all the countries, which is directly linked to the operational program. In this case, for the reduction of energy consumption, you have a national program for reconstruction of multifamily buildings, or national energy efficiency action plan, or now all countries in the European Union have national integrated energy and climate plans, NECPs, which are now currently finalized by the countries after the comments from the European Union. So the operational programs and the goals have to be in line with the policies that are currently working. So, and this is the goals that have to be kind of implemented. In this case, it's a reduction of cooling and heating and so on, which is kind of logical. So you have to align your planning with the legislative framework. Other fund which is also interesting is European Regional Development Fund. This is something that everyone has seen or as Interreg and the cross-border cooperations between the countries, between the regions. And the European Regional Development Fund also has a low carbon economy as a priority, and in a more developed region it has to include 20% of the funding has to be for low carbon economy projects. I can give you an example of a project that's being implemented, for example, in Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Montenegro as a cross-border cooperation. We are developing micro power plant which is going to be implemented in public buildings. So this is an example of financing of through ERDF. ERDF funding can be found as all these interreg, so interregional cooperations. Besides these 5 funds which are managed in cooperation between European Union and national, so countries, member states, there are also sources of funding which are divided in programs of the European Union. One of these is the one that we are currently happy to joining us, so Horizon 2020. And these are divided by priorities, so, and managed from the European Union, so from Brussels. You can see that administration is a large amount of burden for administration for the programs is 70 billion euros for the period of 2014 to 2020. So it's a big administration, big program. So this includes also sustainable growth, natural resources, economic, social, and territorial cohesion, security and citizenship, and competitiveness for growth and jobs. I'll mention only some funds which you've probably heard of. So this in sustainable growth and natural resources, these are, for example, LIFE program. LIFE program includes traditional projects in nature, environment, resource efficiency, plus governance projects. These are very large projects related to, for example, national parks and so on, or governance, so analysis and monitoring of implementation of different legislative framework and so on. And there's also rural development, which is managed via local action groups, so groups of local communities, which are also implementing sustainable projects, for example, renewable energy in a rural area and so on. For example, for competitiveness for growth and jobs, we can find funding from Connecting Europe facility. This is actually for big projects for international EU infrastructure, maybe less interesting for local communities, but for example, Erasmus Plus for boosting skills and employability can be very interesting, for example, for adult learning in some area of energy efficiency and so on. And the competitiveness for growth and jobs also includes some investment funds, so which are combined with the ERDF for financing of the projects via banks, let's call it like that. Okay, besides EU funding, so this is what we call in general EU funding, we also have funds from European Emission Trading System. So emission trading system is a system where companies who have a certain amount of emissions and also energy production, so power plants are selling and buying their emissions if they are over the cap. So, and these allowances are auctioned inside the countries and on the level of the European Union, and countries use these financial resources obtained from the sale of greenhouse gas emissions for different kind of energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. You can see what amount is used for national level project in, for example, 2013 to 2015. For example, I can tell you an example of Croatia. Croatia has a fund for energy efficiency and environmental protection, which is a collector and manager of the auctioning money. And with this, they are having programs which are serving for as funding for smaller projects for example, refurbishment of family buildings. They also gave some kind of let's call it grants for buying electric vehicles and so on. So this is also a source of financing for sustainable development. Okay, just a few words about financing in the next period. As we can see, the development until now, it's going to be a combination of different mechanisms where public and private partnership and European Investment Bank and national funding will be combined with EU budget and ETS into mechanism for grants and for loans. And part of it will be just transition mechanisms and just transition fund, something that's mentioned in this next period. It is a fund that's going to help traditionally coal-led regions to easily or to more easy transit to let's call it new development. This is a very good development for some countries, for example, Poland, which is very coal dependent, and the regions, since the planning will be for the just transition will be on regional level for regions which are very coal driven. On the other hand, there are regions which are very inefficient, for example, in Croatia, but not coal driven. So there are going to be some, let's call it gainers and losers from the changes in the funding. But all in all, there is some still a negotiation going on. It's not completely clear who is going to manage all the funding. So, okay, besides EU funding and ETS, there is also a part of EU funding which is not grants, but loans via banks, via private banks, which are co-financed from EBRD and from European Structural and Investment Funds. And this is actually a lower interest rate from commercial banks. For example, they are usually on a national level called green loans, where you can finance energy renovation, renewable sources in different sectors, either in public sector or in private sector. In very many cases, for example, in Croatia for sure, and other countries also, these funds are used for financing the part of the projects which are not eligible for grants. So if you're eligible for grant for refurbishment of a household, you get a grant, but then you have some expenses which are not eligible for grant, but you can fill this with a loan. And this is also usually available directly on the banking market. Okay, there is also funding called EU Support for Creation and New Financial Instruments. Those have very nice names, Jessica and Elena. And it's joint European support for sustainable investment in city areas. It helps national governments to combine ESIF with their private funds and other public funds into something that's used for urban development. And also there is an initiative called ELENA, which is here for a long time, which provides technical assistance for the project, so before implementation of the project, for the development of this project itself. And some other new mechanisms like integrated territorial investment instrument. It's usually used for district heating, refurbishment, and so on. And we also have already mentioned Interreg and Horizon, which are helping us to develop new financial mechanisms. There are a lot of Interreg and the Horizon project which are working on public-private partnership, contract development, and so on. So guarantees for investments and so on. Okay, so there is also a way of financing energy efficiency project, which is which is being developed from 2000 and I think 3 or 4, and still not completely developed on the level of the European Union. It always has some issues with either guarantees or a way of measurement and verification of savings and so on. So it's a situation where you actually you have your energy bill as a company, and you want to lower it, but you don't have enough money for the investment. And so you engage with ESCO, so energy service company, which then calculates your savings. So your these savings are not actual savings, these are calculated savings. So if you change your behavior, or if you change something in your company, you will have lower savings, which is expected. And so what they do, they charge their fee, and they charge the fee of investment, and then they do the investment themselves and the whole project themselves. And after that, your bill is lower, but you still have to pay the same because you are paying for the expenses of the company. After all the expenses are paid, it can be 7 years or can be 20. Of course, it depends on the cost of money. And they've received, it depends on the cost benefit analysis of the project. It depends on how repayable the project is. Then the savings are left to you as the owner, and you have to pay a lower energy. This is very popular for example, public lighting. Why? Because changing public lighting to LED is is a project that's repaid in a very short period of time. That's why both companies and the users love this one. It's repaid in very short period of time, and the duration of the contract is shorter, and so they find it more like secure. What's the problem with private investor? So as for example, if you want to refurbish your building, if you have multiple apartment building as owner of an apartment, and you're part of this multi-apartment building, what happens is that there has to be developed guarantee by the state or by the fund, or by the EU funding for the company to invest. So they are not very keen on cooperating with private persons due to this, let's call it, risk of repayment. Although this is semi-real, since also it could happen with any other in any other investment and situation. Okay, some situations in financing which includes citizens, which are most interesting. These are microloans, crowdfunding. This is also energy cooperatives and joint investments, which are very interesting for the citizens and in their level of possibilities. We are just implementing one project about small renewables, and we did a lot of workshops with the citizens directly, trying to ask them which way of investment is most interesting to them, even if they calculate the repayment of the renewable energy investment, and it's positive and it's good for them. And even when they have money to invest, they still prefer joint investment in energy cooperatives, which is very good sign for the future, because in this area of Europe, for example, in Croatia, there is still this negative view on the cooperatives. So these energy cooperatives are changing the view on participation and cooperation, which is a very good result. So, okay, this is an example of microloan from a Croatian green energy cooperative. It's an NGO. It's a cooperative which works partially as an NGO, so doing a lot of awareness, but also they're investing in projects in microloans. So this collects money from cooperative members and small investors through microloans. So they had a public call and asked for the microloans from the citizens on small and medium enterprises and so on. They received a lot of donations from local community. So because they local community didn't have the ownership themselves, it's owned by the school, so the cooperative, which is founded by the school, but they kind of felt the ownership due to the fact that the school is something that their own children are part of. So it was also a nice way of financing a small project. And energy cooperatives as a final example, something which is becoming more and more popular. This is the potential for 2050, where it's expected that a lot of energy projects will be funded through cooperatives. There are countries like Denmark, which are already very good in this. There are some, of course, legislative framework in all EU countries which has to be changed, and it has to kind of adapt and ease the administrative burden on the cooperatives, especially in Eastern and Southeastern European countries. But all in all, the potential is very high. Yeah, and I think that's it. My 25 minutes are gone. Thank you very much for the attention. I hope I'll be there in the next period of time if we have any discussion, or if we can talk about it a bit more.